Good afternoon and welcome back to a webinar from MedCom Benefit Solutions. It seems like we are reaching out to everyone multiple times a week now with so many updates coming out about the COVID-19 situation and how that affects clients, employers, and employees. So we are so glad that all of you were able to join us for the coronavirus, flexible spending accounts, and more at such a late notice. So thank you for being here today. And thank you for taking time and putting your trust into MedCom Benefit Solutions. My name is Casey Hope. I'm the marketing manager at MedCom Benefit Solutions. And I'm joined today by Michelle Barkey, our senior legal counsel. Michelle has years of experience as a lawyer, but she also is a registered nurse and has many years experience in the medical industry. And is definitely our go-to at MedCom for answering all of our questions. So we're very happy to have her here today. Just a couple of things to go over before I turn the presentation over to Michelle. This presentation is being recorded. We are recording this presentation, and after it's over, once we have time to process through it, we will be sending out the recording and a copy of the slide deck from this presentation to anyone who attended the webinar or registered in advance. So if you're just now joining us, I just want to go ahead and say again, this presentation is being recorded and we are going to be able to send it along with the slide deck out to all of the participants after the webinar today. Also, at the conclusion of the webinar, we will be having a question and answer session. I will be asking the questions, Michelle will be answering. I will do my best to kind of weed through and not ask too many questions repeatedly. So be patient with us and definitely stick around for that Q&A session at the end so that you can submit your questions in the questions panel and we can address those at the end of the webinar. And now, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Michelle Barkey. Michelle?
Thank you, Casey. And welcome everybody to our webinar today on flexible spending accounts and more based on a notice that the IRS sent out yesterday. And I am absolutely thrilled that we have more guidance. Many of you have attended our desktop discussions on a weekly basis and questions galore regarding flexible spending accounts and COVID. And I hope to be able to answer all your questions today. Today, we're going to talk just a little bit about where we began. Then we're going to get right into the flexible spending accounts. And notice 2020-29 that the IRS released around noon yesterday. We're also going to talk about dependent care accounts, even though the question comes up a little bit, not as much, and there's always been a little bit more flexibility. We've got some other news on that. And then we're going to talk a little bit about special enrollments. Do you remember back in March and early April, all the insurance companies were opening up special enrollment again and saying, hey, anybody who didn't get it the first time round and wants to enroll in the plan, we will allow it. And the question always came up, can we do that under Section 125? And we have some further details on that today as well. And then how do you document and when the plan documents? So that's where we're going to go today, and welcome once again everyone who is attending. The information always is intended to be used for informational and educational purposes and does not constitute any legal or tax advice at this time. Questions usually come up and they're usually specific, and we tend to generally answer the questions, but again, if there's anything in particular that you need legal counsel for, we always suggest that employers contact their own counsel. Well, just a little bit of an update on the coronavirus. As you know, we're beginning to slowly open up some of the states, and we all must be aware of what the symptoms are. And as I mentioned last week, they are increasing now. So if you have a cough, short of breath, and at least two of the following: fever, chills, repeated shaking, muscle pain, headache, sore throat. And now we also realize that there can be some issues with smell or taste. Then it would be good for you to reach out to your physician, and you can even do it by telemedicine at this point. But again, as we were talking about, our cheese, in the 90s, there was a book that was called Who Moved My Cheese, and it talked about you had to be flexible because things move sometimes pretty quickly. Well, certainly in this COVID-19 world, things are moving quickly. Last week, we had the breakout periods to discuss that affected Cobra and runout periods. And the cheese has been moved again, and the saga continues, but I'm really excited because it's regarding flexible spending accounts. IRS issued the notice 2020-29 yesterday, and they've given employees a lot more flexibility. As they stated, the IRS said that, really seriously with regards to the COVID-19, and we do need additional flexibility with respect to cafeteria plans. So therefore, they are allowing more flexibility with all 125 plans, including flexible spending and dependent care assistance programs. But unlike the outbreak period that we talked about last week, which affected Cobra and some runout periods, the outbreak period was absolutely mandated. You had to follow it. But with what we're going to talk about today, it's at the employer's discretion, and the employers are going to be given a lot more flexibility. So you don't have to do this, but you do have the flexibility now. In the desktop discussions and all out, we have heard time and time again, especially for the non-calendar year plans, that there was a lot of challenges being faced based on the fact that with the FSAs and the limited amount of times that you can actually change an FSA election, and then with the surgeries being canceled and the dentists being canceled and vision being canceled, it was causing a lot of angst out there that those with FSA elections, especially in non-calendar year plans, where they were coming up to the end or even have reached the end of the 2019-2020 plan year, that there was a lot of angst that they were going to have a lot of use it or lose it, and employees were very upset about that. So the IRS stated in their notice yesterday that they will now allow the unused amounts to be used up until December 31st of 2020 on non-calendar year plans if the employer so desires. So therefore, for example, even if a plan ended on June the 20th or June 30th of 2020, the funds left over in that participant's FSA can be used up until December 31st, 2020, if the employer so wants to make that adjustment to the plan. The employer must amend the plan document to support this change, but now it won't be a use it or lose it situation. They can actually use the money up until the end of the year. If the plan has a carryover, there was another notice that was put out yesterday, and that was notice 2020-33, and it said starting in 2020, so this does not affect plan years that commenced in 2019, but for all plan years that start in 2020, regardless of what date in 2020, we are now going to have an index in the amount that you can carry over. So for 2020, it's going to go up to $550. And basically how this is going to work, so we will know each year what the indexed amount is going to be, is once the IRS tells us what the maximum contribution level is to an FSA, 20% of that can be carried over in the future. So if that's something that you want to do and go with the indexed amount, we can amend the plan documents accordingly. So if the plan has a carryover, and it's a non-calendar year plan this year, then you would only go to $500 for the carryover, and that carryover would be determined after December 31st of 2020 if you allow the employee to continue on a non-calendar year plan to have to use his FSA money until December. So that is really, really great news on all fronts for that. So how would that work, for example? Well, John elected to take out $1,200 in his FSA plan that was a non-calendar year plan from July 1st, 2019 through June 30th of 2020. At the end of June, because of all these shutdowns and the fact that the dentist wasn't working and he couldn't have an elective surgery, John had spent only $600, and he had a balance of $600. The plan had no carryover provision, meaning that John would really lose that $600 if things stayed the way they were up until yesterday. But now, under 2029, the plan can be amended, and John would have up to December 31st to incur the claims and get reimbursed. Now, if he incurred the claims only in the amount between June 30th to December 31st of $500, that would have brought him to an $1,100 total that he used, and he would have lost that $100. However, if there was a carryover provision, the carryover provision then would go into effect after the end of all the expenses that he incurred up till December 31st, and he would have been able to carry over that extra $100. And just as we said below, any plan starting in 2020, we now have that increase in the amount of carryover funds. But the IRS didn't stop there. That would have been great news unto itself. We would have had a lot of angst people having some kind of resolution. But the IRS recognized that there's other issues too. We had people that were furloughed. What do we do with the FSA? Well, you have to continue to contribute to the FSA. What about this? What about that? So the IRS also told employers, look, you're going to have flexibility in 2020 to do what you want. You can allow them to make new elections. You can allow them to revoke an existing election. And you can allow them to increase or decrease the election. And not only that, this isn't a one-time fix-all, like we can only do it once. So for an example, if they were on furlough, you could allow them to revoke the election. They come back from furlough, you could allow them to elect again. But again, to make sure that they don't go over the maximum allowed by the IRS. And it would be up to the employer as to how complicated they want to get it. So one of the questions that have often come up is, if I allow my employees to revoke an election, what happens at that time if somebody has already spent all the monies in the FSA account? Well, again, the IRS gave flexibility here. So an employer could say, we will allow everybody to revoke their existing election, but not for any monies that were overspent, so only up to the amount that you actually contributed. So that would be something that you could also put in the plan document. It would be clear to all that if you spent the money, well, you don't get to now revoke the election and not continue to pay for the monies that you've already spent. But if you hadn't spent the monies, or if you're underspent, then we will allow you to revoke the plan. So basically what this is it's permitted election changes. You don't have to allow it, but it gives the employer a lot of flexibility now. So MedCom had offered previous advice in all our desk talks and throughout the beginning of this whole pandemic. And we advised our clients that the FSA elections prior to this notice were basically written in stone unless there was a status change in status or another qualifying event that would allow somebody to revoke their FSA election. We also advised that this year would probably be a year of discretionary enforcement, but there would be no guarantee. And we always advised the employer that if they wanted to bend the rules in any way, they should be prepared to demonstrate that all their actions were in the best interest of the participants, not designed to circumvent the payment of owed taxes, applied in a fair and non-discriminatory way, and be reasonable. So what happens if you followed that advice and you made some of these changes before today or yesterday when this notice came out? The IRS says you're still good to go. They said if clients made any concessions, they are going to be safe if they followed what they say in this notice. So if you increase, decrease, allow them to terminate, allow them to enter into the contract, you're safe. If you extended the period of time of the carryover, or if you allowed them to continue to use the funds that they had left in their account, you're safe. Even if you said, you know what, at the end of the day, these people that had monies left in their account, we're just going to give it back to them, whatever monies they had spent because, you know, they weren't able to use it. Well, that's actually a termination, isn't it? So that you're safe. So most of the things that you could have done up until this point, if you were trying to take care of your employees in this year that we thought would be discretionary enforcement, you are probably safe now under the rules that the IRS has just provided. Now let's talk about dependent care assistance programs, because this comes up all the time too when we do the tabletop. And we've always said that unlike FSAs, the provisions of the IRS regulations to providing with the DCAP are a little bit more flexible, and you could change the amounts that you contribute based on whether or not you had a change in provider. And certainly we know that there's been many changes of providers. The daycares have been closed, the schools have been closed. There's been a lot of things going on with DCAP. So we have allowed people to come in and out of DCAP. But just in case there's any confusion on the DCAP, the IRS said the same thing they did for the FSA. They're going to allow employers to decide whether or not they want to allow the employees to make new elections, to revoke an existing election, or decrease or increase an election. So we're right back to where we were with the FSAs. Anything goes this year as far as increasing, decreasing, and terminating, and the employer would have a lot of say as to how this goes on. So just know that the employer does have a lot of flexibility this year. Now, special enrollment rights. Again, we talked about it early in the beginning of this presentation that in March and April, the insurance companies were saying, hey, anybody that didn't enroll in the plan during open enrollment, and they were basically talking about calendar year plans, we will allow them to enroll. We told our clients that this is fine and dandy. We don't believe that the IRS is going to enforce it. Any penalties here, but it really didn't fall under Section 125. There was nothing in Section 125 that would allow this this special enrollment. But the IRS now says you're good to go here too. So that an employer for a sponsored health plan on a prospective basis, again, if the employee initially declined to elect coverage and you want to allow them to enroll in the coverage, if you want to have another open enrollment, you're good to go. And as the advice said, if you've already done it and you've done it in the past and it follows this notice, well, that's good and you're still good to go. So all those open enrollments that were held in February and March, if you did it on a post-tax basis, go ahead and change it to a pre-tax basis. They're also allowing employers to allow individuals to revoke the coverage that they already elected or to change the coverage. They're also allowing anybody else to come into the plan. So for an example, if you had a family member that you didn't initially enroll and now you want to enroll them and it wasn't a question of a early marriage or anything like that, you can go ahead and get that dependent enrolled. So anybody in the past who wants to enroll can now go ahead and enroll. The only caveat to this is twofold. Number one, check with the insurance carriers if you're fully insured. They know that we have the right to these special enrollments. Ask them if you put this in the plan document or if this is the way the employer wants to go, whether they will go along with it. You don't want any surprises at the end where you said, come on down and enroll, and then the insurance company denies the claims. And the same holds true with the reinsurance carrier. Make sure the reinsurance carrier is good with it as well. But this does open the door and allows for the possibility that people can enroll, disenroll, change coverage, and add new family members to the coverage. Now, if somebody decides to voluntarily terminate the coverage, Remember back in the ACA days, and the IRS had come up and said, if you're going to terminate the coverage voluntarily, and you would do so because you might have a reduction in hours, you had gone through a measurement period, and you were determined to be full-time, and therefore you had to be offered coverage for the full stability period. But at the end, but during the stability period, your hours may have been reduced, and you might not have been able to afford the coverage any longer. And the question was whether or not you could drop the coverage. And under a notice 2014-55, the IRS said, yes, you can. But they made a couple of caveats to it. One of the caveats was that you had to get coverage within the second month, the beginning of the second month after you terminated the coverage, and that the employers were supposed to get some reassurances that this had happened. And now the IRS is saying the same thing here, that if the employee wants to voluntarily withdraw from the plan, they're on furlough, they have a reduction in hours, you can allow them to do so, but they must get coverage elsewhere. And the IRS says if they're voluntarily terminating the coverage, you've got to let them know. And then they gave this advice, this type of termination of coverage that you would get the employee to sign, that they understand that they have to enroll somewhere else, whether it is at the marketplace or whether they're getting Medicaid, Medicare, TRICARE, or whatever they're doing or going on their spousal plan. So they just want to make sure that the individual knows that they have to get coverage elsewhere. Now, again, as they said in Notice 2014-55, you're not the watchdog. You don't have to come back 2 months later and say, did you get the coverage? This is the reasonable assurance that they are going to get the coverage. You don't have to play watchdog and ensure that they actually follow through. So plan documents, lots of plan document changes. I mean, we're allowed to make all these changes. So what do we have to do? Do we have to amend the plan document? And the IRS says, yes, you must adopt a plan amendments if you're going to do any of this. So however you change the cafeteria plan for your health FSA, your dependent care assistance program, anything that you're doing in consideration of this new notice that the IRS put out, if this is what you're going to do, you have to amend your plan document. So you want to make sure that that plan document gets amended. So when do we have to have it adopted? Well, if you're a calendar year plan and you're in the 2020 calendar year plan and you're making any changes to allow them to withdraw or to revoke or to do whatever you needed to do for the 2020 plan year, you don't have to have the plan documents actually in hand until December 31st of 2021. I certainly would not wait that long, but they are giving us time to get the documents completed. And it would be retroactive back to January 1st of 2020. So that's basically what they're telling us is December 31st of 2021, but make sure that you amend the plan documents and get them in hand. They did also advise that if you're making these changes, even though you have time in the plan document to make changes, you should let your employees know. There's nothing more aggravating if an employee thinks that they have to, especially in a non-calendar year plan, spend all that flexible spending account, plan may in the end of July, and they've just gone out to the FSA store and bought a whole bunch of stuff they didn't need because they can't get the treatment. So if you're going to allow them to go until December 31st to spend that money, make sure they know. So we have to send out some kind of notices, but the plan documents don't actually have to be left till January 1st of, December 31st of 2021. For those clients that are MedCom clients on your flexible spending side or your DCAP side, please let us know what you want us to do and how you want us to handle. If you are going to allow terminations, if you're going to allow people to enroll, or if you're going to allow that money to be spent until December 31st of 2020 if you're a non-calendar year plan. And we will go ahead and make the necessary changes and make sure that everything is amended and updated. So in summary, as you know, this is the second webinar we put together in a couple of in the last week on changes. The laws are changing rapidly. A lot of it will be discretionary enforcement, but I'm really happy to hear that we have a lot of flexibility now with flex spending accounts, and that the clarification is there for the DCAPs, and that anybody who participated in those open enrollments in March and April that the insurance carriers were offering can now go ahead and do that pre-tax if you did it post-tax. So take it one step at a time, and know that the laws are changing. We may have some more down the road, but this one was a major one because that was one of the biggest questions we'd been asked, was about the flexible spending accounts. So again, for those who might be first time round with MedCom, just to give you an idea about MedCom, we've been in business since 1983 as a benefit consulting group. We used to be a third-party administrator, so we also know how to pay claims. We do have different departments. We have an ACA reporting and a penalty appeal support department that will take care of all your ACA needs. We do Cobra and premium billing administration. And those who have Cobra with us know that we're working on the outbreak period. We do have the consumer-driven health plan administration, so your flexible spending accounts, your DCAPs, and HSAs and HRAs, we do administrate those as well. So just know that any changes, if you're a MedCom client, that you want us to make in light of this advice today, please let us know. We also have a health and welfare compliance section that also does actuarial services. And then the HIPAA, privacy, and security, we do that as well. So we have lots of products that we can offer you, but just know that I'm real excited today to have you all participate, and that we have these changes for the FSAs, which we really are happy about. So Casey, do we have any questions?
Yes, we do. A few questions came at the beginning that may have been answered, but I'm going to try to go back to the very beginning when questions started coming out. Are carriers required to allow mid-year election changes without the HIPAA special enrollment event?
Okay. They did not say that this was mandatory. That's why it's really important before you tell your employees that they can enroll in your health plan to check with your reinsurance carriers and your insurance companies. If you're a MedCom employee, for the FSAs, of course, we will honor anything that you decide within this guidance for FSAs and the DCAP programs.
Okay, we had several questions about the dates, plan dates. What does this apply to? So for what plan years does this extension apply? Plans ending as of what date? Can we go back over that a little bit?
Sure. The issue really came up as far as going to pay claims up until December 31st. That was really for the non-calendar year plans, because their plans ended before December 31st. So now they have until December 31st, regardless of grace periods or carryovers or anything, if you want to allow them to go to December 31st, as long as the plan ended sometime in 2020. So even if it was December, February 1st to January 31st, and that was the plan year, you can go back and allow those January 31st terminations to go into December of this year. So anything that had a plan end date this year, this applies to. And then, of course, for the calendar year plans, you can certainly, it wouldn't do any difference to extend the payment period to December 31st, because that's what it is anyways. But you can certainly add for the terminations and all that. You can allow for that.
Okay. For the non-calendar year FSA through 12/31, is that for incurring claims or just the filing of the claims?
That's for incurring claims. They can spend the money.
Excellent. Thanks for that clarification. Extensions on when claims can be incurred. Does this apply to FSA, HRA, DCAP, and LPF extensions on when the claims can be incurred?
The DCAP is usually to the end of the calendar year anyways. So yes, you can do that for the DCAP, you can do it for the FSA and the HRA. You can have the claims incurred till the end of the year. Now with the HRA, it's an employer-driven plan, so the employer can always make the decision as to when these claims can be incurred.
Okay. With the rollover change to up to 550 and it being retroactive to January 1st of 2020, does this mean amounts remaining from the 2019 plan year? Does that apply to this as well?
No, it only applies to the plan years that commence in 2020. So that if you have a January 2020 plan or any other plan that commenced sometime in 2020, that's when you can have the carryover at 550. The plan had to commence in 2020, from what I understand.
Okay. And I think we covered this one when you went over the plan documents, but I just want to make sure if the plan has a carryover of $500 now, does it automatically change to 550 or must an amendment be made to the plan documents?
An amendment would have to be made to the plan document unless the plan document said to the maximum allowable by the IRS, and then it wouldn't require an amendment. So it all depends on how the plan document is written, and we'd have to look at that. And again, this would be up to the employer. The employer always has the right to say what they want the carryover to be, whether they want it to be the maximum, which most do, or whether they just want it to be another amount. But if you want it the maximum, we would have to check the plan documents to see what the plan documents say.
What happens if an individual didn't re-enroll in 2020 and had funds left in 2019? As I understand it, even if no new deposits are made, employees have to sign up again in order to roll over funds, correct?
Typically, I will have to defer that question, and I'll get back to you on that answer. That's more of a less administrative, but I will check on that.
Okay, what we can do is I'll make a note of that, Michelle. I'll kind of flag that question, okay, and we can always pull that out and then readdress it next week during our desktop discussion. But we will get back to the person who submitted that question as soon as we have the answer.
Fantastic.
Excellent. So okay, let me make sure I'm at the right question here. Does the dependent care account or program have the same ability to incur claims through 12/31/20 for non-calendar year plans as well, or is that just for the FSA?
I will have to check on that. Let me check on that one to be sure, but typically the dependent care can go to the end of the calendar year, but let me check on that just to be sure.
Okay, and we'll do that the same way as the one before. If employees ask for a refund of what they've already contributed to their DCAP, should we refund them minus the taxes associated to that contribution that were not deducted?
If they want, well, the changes have to be prospective changes, is what the IRS is saying. So if you made the changes already, so they can't go back and say, I want to do a retroactive for 3 or 4 months retroactively. I want to terminate this. They have to go prospectively. So now they can terminate what they're contributing. But from my understanding, these are prospective changes, not retroactive changes.
Okay. Is the voluntary termination only available to furloughed employees, but the mid-year changes are available to anyone?
It's going to be depending upon the plan. The employer has the right to make the mid-year changes available to anyone. So it's all going to depend on how the employer wants to treat this. Treat everybody equally in the same classification, but the employers are going to have flexibility to see how they want to manage the plan.
How far back can an employee go back and enroll a dependent they previously waived coverage on?
It's supposed to be prospectively, so that what they would do is they would enroll the dependent now. So anybody, if the carrier would agree to it, and again, we've asked you to check with carrier, these are prospective changes. They would not be retroactive changes.
In the 12-month measurement period required for hourly employees, or can they be measured on a monthly basis if they consistently work over 30 hours per week?
Okay, that's a great ACA question. Basically, you put someone in a measurement period if they are a variable hour employee and you do not know how many hours they're actually going to be working. So, and that is a way to determine whether or not they're full or part-time. If you hire somebody and they're reasonably expected to work 30 hours a week or more, then you do not put them in a look-back measurement period. You do measure them monthly. And that monthly measurement period is basically just assuming that they are working full-time at that point. So it's not the same. You don't have to do a look-back measurement period and wait until the end of the look-back measurement period to offer benefits. Anybody that is reasonably expected to work full-time benefits should be offered no later than the 91st day of employment.
This question is related to that. If the monthly measurement period is used for the hourly employees and their hours are reduced to less than 30 hours per week, can their medical coverage be terminated?
Okay. Now they can voluntarily terminate their coverage if the plan so desires to allow them to do so and to get them to sign that form. However, under the ACA, if they are reasonably expected to work 30 hours a week or more and they had, and then their hours were reduced, the minimum you have to offer them coverage is 3 months. They have to be, and then you measure them for those 3 consecutive months to make sure that each of those months they actually worked under 130 hours a week. And if that's the case, then you can classify them as part-time and terminate the coverage. That is something that a lot of people missed with the ACA when it came out. It was a 3-liner, and it was really to satisfy the employer's desire not to have to look at the full look-back measurement period and then potentially offer somebody who had been full-time and only went through a 91-day maximum waiting period to have to pay them more than that. So yes, you would allow them to drop out of the plan, but it would have to be voluntary. You couldn't terminate them from the plan without facing some ACA.
Will members be able to make changes anytime to their plan elections through December 31st of 2020?
Yes. And, for those that are on a calendar year plan, and you may not know now we don't know what's going to happen in the near future. So, potentially you don't want to make any changes. I mean, it's up to you, but you may not want to make any changes until summer to determine, whether or not we get back, whether the FSA dollars can be spent, et cetera, and where we're heading. So, yes, it's up to the employer, and the employer can do it anytime in 2020.
Is the extension for the grace period only applicable to non-calendar year plans? The IRS guidance had an example for a calendar year plan. Is that correct?
Yeah, the calendar year plan, the grace period is still, on the calendar year plan, is still 2.5 months. Basically, that example just kind of combined the two together. But yes, the grace period is 2.5 months on a calendar year plan. At the end of December, they would have the 2.5 month grace period. They couldn't have the carryover though. You can only have the grace period or the carryover. This really affects more the non-calendar year plans. But I'll take a look at that sample that you indicated.
And you did say that if you have a carryover, you cannot also have a grace period, correct?
That is correct. I mean, that's under the IRS regs and previously that you either have a carryover or you have a grace period. But in this case, even though you have a grace period, everything can be extended if you want until December 31st for those non-calendar year plans in order to get the payment, to get the expenses incurred.
If our medical carrier offered employees and dependents a special enrollment due to COVID, does our plan need to be amended for that?
Yes, it should be amended for that now. Now that the IRS has said that you can do it, and you can do it if you've already done it. You can go retroactive and allow it. You can't go now retroactive and say, hey, if you want to go retroactive and terminate. But if you've already done it in the past, the IRS is allowing it, and yes, the plan should be amended to make that special enrollment.
Do these same rules and changes apply to dental as well as vision coverage?
That was not clarified in the rules, but since the dentals are 125 plans, we believe that that will also carry over.
All right, thank you. Yes, I think the question is yes, we discussed this during the plan documents section of the presentation, because if the carryover increased to 550, people, if you do that carryover, they are obligated to make amendments to their plan documents, correct?
It depends. If they're changing the carryover to 550, it's all going to depend on how specific the plan documents were. If the plan documents had said in the past, we are only going to allow a 500 carryover, and you want to go to the 550 for plans that start in 2020, then yes, you would have to amend the plan document. If your plan document was more vague and it said we will allow a carryover up to the IRS maximum allowable, then because 550 is now the IRS maximum allowable, you would not have to amend the plan document. So it all depends on how specific the wording was in the plan document, whether or not you would need to amend it.
For clients that use Employee Navigator or sites where the participant can just go in and update it themselves, are they okay to do it on websites themselves, or must they go through HR and notify the account manager, etc.?
Read that question again, Casey.
Sure. For clients that use Employee Navigator or similar sites to that, where participants can go in and update their accounts themselves, are the participants okay to do it on those websites, or must they go through their HR and notify the account manager?
Okay. I will have to get back to you on that. If you're talking about a MedCom client, I'm pretty sure we can do it with the Navigator, but I just want to check with our CDHP department.
What about employees that were terminated in 2020? Can we include those employees when considering making the changes to our plan?
Anything that has already been, if they were terminated back in 2020, and you can't go retroactive is what the IRS is saying. You can only make prospective changes, so that you cannot go back to 2000 and the ones that were already terminated and do anything. But we would need more information before we could actually come out and say a yes or no. But this is supposed to be for prospectively moving forward.
Will the funds be separated in the FSA account, or will the amount be included in the total, including the new election?
I would have to defer to our CDHP department on that, so we will get back to you on that.
Is this extension mandatory for, and all employers must allow this additional time?
No, this is completely up to the employer as to whether they want to give this additional time on a non-calendar year plan. Everything we discussed today about the flexible spending accounts, the DCAPs, and the special enrollment rights, it is all up to the employer and what the employer decides that they want to do and how they want to handle it. This is what they call a permitted election change. They're permitted to do it, but they don't have to do it. When we talked last week about the outbreak periods and how that affected the run-out periods, that was mandatory. We do have to follow that guidance. But these are permitted. The employer is allowed to do this or not to do this. This is a permitted election change.
Okay. When writing the amendment to your plan to allow these changes, should the amendment include open and closing dates that are in effect?
It all depends on the way that you typically write your plan documents, but there should be a mention that this is for the calendar year 2020 due to COVID. And then if you do have a specific date that this goes into effect, I would put that too.
Okay. So if the employer chooses this option, an employee could change medical plans in September of 2020 and it would be retroactive to January 1st of 2020. How will carriers handle the claims that have been paid?
No, it would not be retroactive. Again, we're talking prospectively. So they could change their election to the plan and then it would go into effect when they made that election change. It would not go back retroactively. So every decision that is made by the employee would be prospective. It would be what's happening at the time they make the change. It would not go back retro. So it will not affect claims payments that way.
In regards to dependent care programs, one, if they stop contributions now and then need to restart them, do they need a specific reason and to provide proof?
Not unless the employer says so. At this stage of the game, what the DCAP, what these notices say that if the employer wants to allow them to terminate and then come back into DCAP, and that's what the employer wants, they're permitted to do that, and they would not have to give a reason.
And what documentation or proof must we keep on file for any changes that an employee may make?
At this stage of the game, your plan document, once the plan document gets amended, and then just make sure that you have something from the employee, just like you would whenever they make an election, that they are changing an election, just as you would at any time anybody makes a change, that you would just follow your normal procedure for that.
And we have a section 125 question. That was for a section 125 question above. How long can the mid-year elections be offered?
They did not give any dates. They just said that this was flexible. So it would be for the calendar year 2020 because of the COVID. But again, the notice was very general, and it said that they were giving the employers flexibility in making decisions as to whether or not they wanted to do open enrollments, whether they wanted to allow employees to come in and out of plans. And for periods of time, I would certainly check with the carriers to make sure that they're going to go along with it.
One of our slides said that changes could be effective January 1st of 2020. Can we clarify what the January 1st, 2020 date is about?
Yeah, if you have everything that you're doing from now on is prospective. It's now you can make these changes. But what the IRS said that if you had already, without their guidance, made these changes before this notice came out, and it followed this notice, you followed that you used some common sense and you thought, we're going to do this for the employees, then that would be retroactive. But everything else is moving forward. But what the IRS said is, if you had already made these changes, they're not going to come after you.
Okay. We have a couple of questions about FSA or, the debit card technology. Will cards be changed to work until 12/31 of 20?
If that is what the employer wants, that they want to allow this extension to 12/31/20, yes, the cards would be changed to indicate that date.
And do we know if the debit cards work yet for the changes made to over-the-counter and menstrual products yet?
Okay. That depends on the actual site where you're picking these up. There's a lot of changes that had to be made. The technology, as far as we're concerned, I think menstrual products was the only one that I think is going to be mid-May. But the over-the-counters, our system at MedCom, the Allegiance system that we use, can actually accommodate it. But the individual pharmacies and vendors would have to change all their codes. So it depends where you go. I go to Publix in Florida, it makes the change. But again, we can't say that all providers have made those changes.
If an employee wants to terminate the company's group medical policy for an individual policy that's purchased outside of the exchange or marketplace, not government sponsored, can they still terminate the group policy?
They can, as long as you get that letter signed that's saying that they are going to get coverage elsewhere.
To clarify for the FSA or DCAP, can we return any unused funds? Can we return any used funds they contributed but have not spent?
That would be up to the employer, but yes, if you allow them to terminate their coverage and they have not contributed the monies, you could certainly say that. So if they wanted to terminate the coverage today, you can terminate the coverage. And it all depends on the way that the employer writes it. But any monies they haven't spent, if they haven't spent a cent and now you're terminating the coverage, you might not be giving them back the money that they've already contributed and everything. So there's still a little bit of clarification on that. But again, the employers have a lot of discretion.
And this is kind of a question that ties back into that. Members who terminate coverage voluntarily still need to find other coverage elsewhere, even though the individual ACA mandate is no longer in place?
Yes. And why? Because the IRS says so. The individual mandate is actually still in place, believe it or not. People get that confused. The penalty for not having individual coverage was reduced to 0. So even though the coverage, the penalty has been reduced to 0, even though the individual mandate is by all in fact null and void, the IRS still mandates under 2014-55 and under these rules that they just published to be consistent that you still have to get assurances that the employee is going to get coverage. Now, as the employer, you're not the watchdog. You just get them to sign that they're going to get this, that they tell you they're going to get it. You have a good faith belief that they are going to get it. That's the end of your responsibility. It would then still be up to the employee. And you don't have to play watchdog. You don't have to say, show me proof of coverage every month. You don't have to do any of that. But the individual mandate is still alive, but it's buried because the penalty was reduced to 0.
For those election changes that can be made through 2020, what if the employer is on a plan year versus a calendar year? Can they can still only make those changes in 2020, not through the end of the plan year that may end in 2021?
Yeah, they're looking at that the plan year that started in 2019 and runs through 2020, that's the plan year that you're basically concerned with. But if you want them, but yeah, I guess if you did have a plan year that started in 2020 and you wanted to terminate, they wanted to terminate you had I think you could probably do that. I'll have to go back and we probably need a little bit more guidance from the IRS, but I would imagine anything that you write for the 2020 calendar year would suffice. But again, we still need a little bit more guidance on that question.
Is the extension not the same thing as having a grace period and a rollover if the plan has a rollover?
Yeah, a grace period, you can't have a grace period and a rollover. You can only have one or the other under the IRS rules. In this case, where the IRS said that you can continue to pay claims on a non-calendar year to December 31st, they never called that a grace period. They just said this is the amount of time that we are giving you in addition to incur claims and then have them paid. After that, if you have a carryover, that's great, but you can't have a grace period and carryover. You can only have one or the other.
Can parking and transit plans also extend to 12/31?
They did not mention anything about transit or parking plans.
Okay, is the allowance for telemedicine to be covered 100% with a high deductible health plan a temporary change, or is it indefinite?
That was a change specifically for the COVID virus, and I do not believe that that is indefinite. I would have to go back and actually read that notice as to what they said. But I know that they said that with telehealth or anything that was specifically related to the COVID virus, which meant that you could go to telehealth, you could go to the emergency room, and up to and including diagnoses of COVID virus, it would be paid at 100%, that would not affect the HSA. But I don't know outside of the COVID virus and telemedicine whether that would affect the HSA. That's something I'd have to research.
How long can a special enrollment period last?
That would be up to the employer and the carrier.
Okay, we're coming to the end of some of our questions. So just to let you know, if you have any of those last minute questions, go ahead and get those submitted. Let's see. If you are a non-calendar year plan and you have a grace period, will you still have the grace period if you allow employees to incur FSA claims through December 31st of 2020?
No, that would kind of incorporate the grace period, depending on when your non-calendar year plan is. If you had a non-calendar year plan, which was in November, then obviously the grace period would go into the next calendar year, so that December 31st would not apply. But if you had a non-calendar year plan that ended in June, your grace period would be long expired before the December 31st. So you would just go to the December 31st if the employer wants to allow it. They don't have to. They can just say, we'll just use the regular grace period and you're done. This was a way to provide flexibility to employers who are facing some challenges with their employees due to the COVID virus and the fact that they couldn't spend that FSA money.
Okay, if you extend the FSA deadline to incur claims to 12/31, do employees still have 60 days beyond that to submit the documentation for eligible expenses?
For the run-out period, I would assume that would, if you have a run-out period of 60 days, I would assume that you would have that ability to have a run-out period that's after that December 31st. Run-out periods are kind of interesting. The government sets no limit on that. Typically they're 30, 45, or 60 days, but there is no limit. There is no law that says you can only have a run-out period for a certain amount of time. So the employer would have some flexibility with that as well.
Okay, and the last question here, to be able to refund unused funds from DCAP or FSA, the employee has to term coverage?
At this stage of the game, that is what the IRS is saying. They are saying that the option for the employee is to spend the monies up until December 31st on a non-calendar year plan, or to terminate coverage, come into the coverage. So it doesn't mention anything about refunding the money.
Okay. We did have someone ask about the Cobra extensions for election and payments. Just to let you guys know, that was a webinar that we did last week. There's a lot to cover there. and our time does not permit for that again today, but what I can do that will help answer your questions, whenever we send out the recording for today's presentation, I will also send out the recording from last week's Cobra webinar that will help answer the questions that you have for Cobra extensions and election periods. How is MedCom handling all of these changes?
MedCom is working really, really hard. Our CDHP department is aware of these changes. I've already spoken to our compliance department about the plan documents, and we might not get them done. I mean, we have until December 31st of next year. Obviously, we'll get them out way before then. But once employers start to tell us what they want to do with these changes, we will make sure that the systems are updated and the changes go through. As far as Cobra is concerned and the outbreak periods that we talked about last week that the question just came up on, MedCom has been working diligently with DataPath, which is our provider, and we're amending all the processes for that as well. We can handle the changes at MedCom, and we are grateful that there's changes for Flex because that's been an issue since the COVID virus came out.
Thank you so much, Michelle. There were a lot of questions here. There was a lot of information once again to digest. I will do my best to get this presentation slide deck and recording out to you. I'll do my best to get that out to you as quickly as possible in hopes that we have addressed as many of your questions as we can. If you still have questions after this today, please feel free to submit that to Michelle and I. We host a desktop discussion every Tuesday at 10 a.m. I will include the information on how to call into that meeting in the information that I send out after the presentation. You can submit questions to us at COVID-19questions@medcombenefits.com. I will send all of this out to you with the presentation from today. Thank you guys so much. We had so much information here, so many questions. I appreciate everyone sticking with us. And Michelle, thank you so much for putting all of these answers together.
Yeah, and if any other guidance comes down on any of this, of course, we will keep everybody updated.
Absolutely. Thank you all again very much. Have a wonderful afternoon.